I was under a lot of pressure, as I said, living at home, defending the fact that I'd won 2 majors in 69 and 70.
Golf legends tried to explain how terrifying Lee Trevino was, but words never quite captured the nightmare he created on championship Sundays, when the pressure was at its peak and the world was watching. They called his swings impossible, techniques that defied every principle taught in pro shops and country clubs across America. They said he bent reality, that somehow he made the ball obey laws of physics nobody else could access. They watched him execute shots that shouldn't work, that violated everything they had been taught about cause and effect in golf. Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear himself, the man who dominated professional golf with robotic precision and mental toughness that seemed unbreakable, finished second to Trevino 4 times in major championships. 4 devastating times. More than to any other single rival in his magnificent career. More than Arnold Palmer, more than Tom Watson, more than Gary Player, more than anyone else who challenged his throne during golf's golden era. And still, after all those defeats, after all that film study and mental preparation and course strategy, Nicklaus couldn't crack the code that would let him beat this wisecracking outsider when championships hung in the balance. Gary Player, the disciplined monk of golf who controlled every variable in his life with military precision, who ate the right foods at the right times, and trained his body like an Olympic athlete long before fitness became standard, felt his entire game unravel the moment Trevino stepped onto the course with that infectious smile. The quiet focus Player had built his entire career on, the internal stillness that made him one of the game's all-time greats, simply evaporated in Trevino's presence. Tony Jacklin, Britain's golden boy and the pride of a nation hungry for golfing success, watched his entire career as a major championship contender collapse in the aftermath of a single chip shot. A miracle that looked casual but broke him psychologically in ways he would never fully recover from, haunting him for decades. These weren't ordinary players getting rattled by a hot streak or a lucky bounce. These were titans of the game, champions who had conquered every challenge golf threw at them, legends who controlled every variable in their mental and physical preparation except one: Lee Trevino, the man who turned golf's calmest minds into nervous wrecks. The hustler from the Texas dirt who made impossible swings look not just routine, but almost boring in their mechanical consistency. The outsider with the working-class roots who walked into the country club world and made kings feel like amateurs fumbling through their first round. Before we dive into exactly how he did it, hit that hype button below this video and give it some love. It helps us keep bringing you stories like this, the untold psychological battles that shaped the game you watch today. Now here's the question that haunted every champion who stepped into a pairing with Lee Trevino. How did a wisecracking kid from the Texas gambling circuits, a guy who learned golf from hustlers and reprobates, who played for his next meal against men carrying what he called artillery in their golf bags, completely dismantle the greatest, most prepared, most disciplined players who ever held a club? The answer isn't hiding in his swing mechanics, though those were bizarre enough to unsettle anyone. It's not buried in his scorecards, though those told their own terrifying story. The real answer is in what he did to their minds, to the very fabric of their mental frameworks. Golf in the 1960s was supposed to be quiet, refined, almost sacred in its adherence to tradition. The sport had rules, not just for how you played, but for how you behaved, how you dressed, how you carried yourself, and, most importantly, for who belonged in the elite circles and who didn't. You had Ben Hogan with his ice-cold stare, practicing until his hands bled, but doing it within the strict framework of country club tradition. Arnold Palmer with his army of devoted working-class followers, a relatable hero who still fundamentally respected the game's genteel boundaries. Jack Nicklaus with his unshakable focus, groomed from childhood to be the perfect champion. Then Lee Trevino arrived like a dust storm from West Texas, and everything the sport thought it knew about itself shifted. Born in 1939 in North Dallas, raised by his mother and grandfather in a 4-room shack that didn't have indoor plumbing, didn't have running water, didn't have anything resembling comfort or security. This wasn't the romantic kind of poverty that builds character in movies. This was raw survival, day-to-day existence with no safety net whatsoever. This was waking up each morning not knowing if you'd eat that day, if there would be work, if the roof would hold. This was a childhood where golf wasn't a pleasant weekend game or a path to college. It was a potential escape route from a life that offered virtually no other exits. Trevino didn't pick up the game at a country club with a junior program and a patient professional. He dropped out of school at age 14, not because he was rebellious, but because his family desperately needed whatever money he could earn. He started caddying at the Dallas Athletic Club, carrying bags for wealthy men, watching them play a game that looked remarkably easy when you had unlimited time and money and access to pristine facilities. He learned golf not from instructional books, but from what he later called reprobates and hustlers, men on the margins of society who saw the game purely as a hustle, as a way to separate marks from their money, men who played for stakes they couldn't afford to lose. While young Jack Nicklaus was perfecting his fundamentally sound swing under Jack Grout in comfortable Ohio, hitting thousands of balls on perfectly manicured practice ranges, Trevino was digging it out of the dirt on underground gambling circuits across Texas, playing on dusty municipal courses against men twice his age. He played matches for $10 when he only had $5 in his pocket, which meant losing wasn't just disappointing, it was potentially catastrophic. He later reflected that once you've played for your next meal against men with artillery in their golf bags, men who treated every shot like life or death, because for them it was, a putt to win the US Open feels almost insignificant by comparison. That brutal crucible forged something his privileged rivals simply never possessed. The ability to feel genuine pressure, the kind that alters your life and not just handle it but laugh at it, refuse to give it power, to stand over a critical putt knowing you might not eat if you miss, and still make a smooth stroke. Trevino learned that pressure is only terrifying if you think you have something to lose. When you've already lost everything, pressure becomes liberating. Number 9 on the list of players who couldn't solve the Lee Trevino puzzle was Chichi Rodriguez, a man who understood Trevino from a cultural and socioeconomic perspective the country club elite simply couldn't access. For Chichi, Trevino wasn't just another talented competitor to beat on Sunday or a dangerous rival to study. He was a trailblazer, a pioneer who kicked down doors that had been locked to players who looked like them, talked like them, came from where they came from. Rodriguez watched Trevino's rise with a complicated mixture of immense pride and genuine terror. He saw how Trevino turned psychological warfare into something more dangerous and effective than any technical swing advantage. Chichi once said Lee Trevino is the most dangerous man in golf when he's on, and then added the crucial detail that explained everything. He's so dangerous because you never know what he's going to do next. That unpredictability wasn't random chaos or lack of discipline. It was calculated, strategic, purposeful. Trevino understood something fundamental about competitive psychology. If your opponent can't predict your next move, they can't prepare an effective defense against it. They're always reacting instead of acting, always half a step behind, always uncomfortable and off balance. For Rodriguez, Trevino's success carried enormous personal meaning that transcended mere golf scores. It meant the PGA Tour, that bastion of country club exclusivity, could no longer ignore or marginalize working-class players who didn't fit the traditional mold. Trevino opened doors simply by being unapologetically himself, by refusing to apologize for his background. But that pride came with an undercurrent of fear because Chichi understood the implications. If Trevino could do what he did to legends like Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, to the game's most mentally tough champions, what could he potentially do to everyone else? Number 8 was Arnold Palmer, the people's champion, the king, the man whose army of devoted followers made him the most beloved and culturally powerful figure in golf history. Palmer built his entire legacy on charisma, on an almost magical ability to connect with blue-collar fans who saw themselves reflected in his aggressive, fearless, go-for-broke style of play. He was the working-class hero who made it big, but never forgot where he came from. Then Trevino showed up on tour with the same working-class roots Palmer had leveraged so effectively, the same natural charisma that made people want to follow him, but with even more raw accessibility and unfiltered personality. Suddenly, slowly but inexorably, Palmer's army started to shift its allegiance. The documentary Beyond Golf captured this cultural earthquake in one devastating sentence. Arnold Palmer watched his army desert him. Trevino didn't just beat Palmer on scoreboards in head-to-head competitions. He outflanked him culturally, appealing to exactly the same demographic Palmer had owned and defined himself by for over a decade. For Palmer, whose entire identity was tied to being the beloved leader of the masses, Trevino's rise felt like a quiet but devastating betrayal. The people who had worshipped Palmer were now cheering louder for the new kid. Even decades later, the uncomfortable dynamic lingered. In 2006, Trevino found himself paired with Palmer for what would become Palmer's final competitive round ever played. On a short par 3, Palmer hit his tee shot and immediately asked Trevino how close is that. Trevino had to deliver the brutal truth. The ball had hit the bank short of the green and rolled backwards into the water. Even worse, Palmer had been aiming at a tree on the hillside, not the actual flag. Palmer, confronted with this evidence of decline he could no longer deny, simply quit on that hole and ended his competitive career right there without finishing. Trevino wasn't trying to humiliate the king, he was just being honest. But the symbolism was unbearably poignant. The king's final moment was a failure witnessed by the very man who had displaced him. Number 7 was Tom Weiskopf, a player who believed with almost religious fervor in the purity and beauty of the golf swing as an ideal. Weiskopf possessed what many experts considered the most beautiful, technically perfect swing in the entire world. A motion so fluid it looked like ballet. Then he had to watch Lee Trevino win major championship after major championship, using what looked like all the wrong moves. Trevino's setup was bizarre. He stood far too far from the ball, farther than any instructor would recommend. His stance was extremely open. His feet aimed well left of target. His grip was considered weak. This combination should, according to every instructional book, produce a massive, uncontrollable slice. Yet somehow Trevino hit controlled, repeatable fades that held their line perfectly in any wind condition. He scrambled, he joked constantly, constantly, he used unorthodox angles, and he kept winning the tournaments that mattered most. For Weiskopf, this was a profound philosophical crisis. His entire belief system said that beautiful, technically sound swings produce consistently great golf. Trevino represented everything Weiskopf's intellectual framework argued should not work. The scrambling, the joking, the ugly fades, all of it violated the natural order. Yet Trevino kept proving the system wrong. This challenged Weiskopf's entire framework, made him question everything he thought he knew. Trevino became a wrong-way winner who destroyed the confidence of those who prioritized beauty over results. Every time Trevino hoisted another trophy, it felt to Weiskopf like a personal attack. Number 6 was Tom Watson, a player known throughout the golf world for possessing mental toughness that genuinely rivaled Nicklaus himself. Watson operated within a carefully controlled, quiet psychological framework, systematically shutting out all distractions and focusing entirely on execution. Nothing rattled him, nothing except Lee Trevino. Watson later cited Trevino as one of the single most difficult opponents he ever faced in his entire career, and crucially, it wasn't because of superior shot making. It was because of Trevino's presence, his energy, his refusal to let the round settle into the quiet rhythm Watson needed. Trevino never stopped talking during a competitive round, never. He joked constantly with fans lining the fairways. He maintained running commentary with his caddy about everything and nothing. He even engaged his playing partners in casual mid-round conversation. For Watson, who desperately needed silence to access his best golf, Trevino's relentless energy was like radio static, jamming the clear signal Watson relied on. The harder Watson tried to focus, to block out the noise and return to his quiet mental space, the more Trevino's constant chatter seemed to pull him out of his own head. Golf Channel archival footage captured Watson's deference toward Trevino, showing the almost fearful respect Watson expressed when discussing Trevino's intimidating precision. This was the Watson paradox. A player universally famous for mental strength, completely undone by an opponent who simply refused to take the game as seriously as everyone else thought it should be taken. Trevino didn't need to be intimidating in the traditional sense. He just needed to be fully human in a game that demanded robotic focus. By being authentically himself, loud and loose and relentless, he exposed the fragility of artificial concentration. Watson could handle any amount of external pressure. He had no defense against Trevino. Number 5 was Johnny Miller, perhaps the most analytically sharp and technically sophisticated golfer of the entire 1970s generation. Miller approached the game like an engineer, breaking down every component of ball flight. He described Trevino's ball flight, his shot shape and trajectory patterns, as almost inhuman in their mechanical consistency. Most elite players of that era, following prevailing wisdom about maximizing distance, sought to hit a high draw, a shot that starts right of target and curves gently left. Trevino built his entire game around the exact opposite shot shape. He hit a low, holding fade, a ball flight that started left of target and curved gently right, landing softer. More importantly, he could repeat this exact shot with almost machine-like precision, regardless of wind conditions, regardless of pressure, regardless of circumstance. Miller once said, and this quote is revealing, "Trevino, myself, you'll see some guys bowing down to the shot." He was referring specifically to the way Trevino controlled his lead wrist position through the critical impact zone, maintaining a distinctly bowed forward position, very similar to what modern players like Dustin Johnson later became famous for using. This particular wrist position minimized face angle variation at the moment when club meets ball. It allowed Trevino to hit what he described as dead straight fades that landed like a soft butterfly with sore feet. Everything about Trevino's setup looked fundamentally wrong to anyone schooled in traditional instruction. He stood too far from the ball, a position that creates compensation problems. His grip was too weak, lacking the strong position teachers advocated. Every instructor would predict disaster. But Trevino had developed a move, a transition he borrowed and adapted from Ben Hogan himself that made the whole system work. He dropped his lead heel and rotated his hips violently, explosively through the ball, generating enormous rotational speed. This hip rotation squared the club face at precisely the right moment, producing a flat, penetrating, wind-proof strike that repeated like clockwork. For Johnny Miller, watching Trevino was like watching someone break fundamental laws of instruction and still produce consistently elite results. It didn't make logical sense, but it worked, undeniably, repeatedly, devastatingly, and that made it terrifying. Number 4 was Gary Player, a man whose existence was built on discipline, focus, and monkish devotion to preparation. Player approached golf with systematic precision, controlling every controllable variable. He ate the right foods, trained his body like an Olympic athlete, decades before fitness became standard. He meditated, visualized, prepared his mind as carefully as his muscles. Then he'd play with Trevino and watch his system collapse. Trevino carried what Player described as a a kind of electricity, a rhythm that didn't match anyone else's. Player famously stated, "If Billy Casper unsettled me with oppressive silence, then Lee Trevino unsettled me with constant disruption." Casper's quiet personality created uncomfortable silence. Trevino's energy created chaotic noise. Different tactics, identical results. Trevino never allowed a round to breathe, to settle into the meditative rhythm player needed. He was constant motion, talking to fans, chatting with his caddy. For player, Trevino's energy was like interference jamming his frequency. Player described playing with Trevino as feeling like the course had shifted into Trevino's tempo. You either kept up with his pace or fell behind and lost rhythm. Player could never find a defense. This was simply Trevino's natural state, forged in loud Texas gambling dens where silence meant weakness. By being himself, Trevino became walking sabotage. It was the perfect weapon because it wasn't a weapon at all. Before we get to the top 3 players on this countdown, we need to talk about the summer of 1971, a 3-week stretch of dominance that cemented Trevino's reputation as golf's single most terrifying and dangerous competitor. In just 21 days, Trevino won 3 of the biggest, most prestigious tournaments in world golf, an achievement that has never been matched and likely never will be. First came the U.S. Open on June 21st at historic Marion Golf Club, where after 72 regulation holes, Trevino stood tied with Jack Nicklaus himself, forcing an 18-hole playoff the next day. Trevino shot .280 for the week, then demolished Nicklaus in the playoff with a brilliant 68. Then, barely 2 weeks later, came the Canadian Open on July 4th, where Trevino shot .275 and won in yet another playoff. Finally, just 6 days after that came the Open Championship, the oldest tournament in golf, played on July 10th at Royal Birkdale. Trevino shot .278 to claim the Claret Jug, becoming the only player in the entire history of professional golf to win the U.S. Open, Canadian Open, and Open Championship in a single season. This wasn't a lucky hot streak or a few fortunate bounces. This was terrifying, relentless, mechanical consistency. 3 dramatically different golf courses on 3 different continents, requiring completely different strategies. 3 different fields of the world's best players, all trying desperately to stop him. 3 victories in just 3 weeks. While his rivals struggled to maintain peak form for even 1 week, burning out after a single major, Trevino somehow kept accelerating, kept finding another gear. That summer proved conclusively what they all feared deep down. When Lee Trevino got hot, he didn't cool down. He just kept winning. Number 3 on the countdown was Tony Jacklin, the reigning hero of British golf, a national treasure who carried the hopes of an entire country on his shoulders every time he teed it up. The 1972 Open Championship at Muirfield was supposed to be Jacklin's coronation, his moment to cement legendary status in front of adoring home fans who had waited so long for a British champion. He and Trevino reached the final round, locked in a compelling head-to-head duel for the Claret Jug, trading brilliant shots and momentum shifts. By the time they walked onto the 17th tee in the fading Scottish afternoon light, they were dead even, tied for the lead with just 2 precious holes remaining between them and immortality. What happened next destroyed Jacklin psychologically and fundamentally altered the trajectory of his entire career in ways he could never have imagined. Trevino played the par 5 17th hole absolutely disastrously from the very start. His drive found a greenside bunker, a terrible miss that left him scrambling. He hacked his way awkwardly down the fairway, each shot worse than the last, the ball refusing to cooperate. By the time he finally reached the back fringe of the green, he was lying 4, having taken twice as many shots as a tour professional should ever need on a reachable par 5. Jacklin, meanwhile, had played the hole exactly as designed by the architect, positioning himself on the putting surface in regulation, lying 3 and facing a very reasonable birdie putt that would almost certainly give him a commanding 2-stroke lead with just 1 hole remaining. From Jacklin's perspective, standing over that birdie attempt, the championship was essentially over, the Claret Jug already his. Trevino had made a catastrophic mistake, and Jacklin had capitalized perfectly. Trevino later admitted in interviews that he had mentally given up on the 17th hole entirely. He was just trying to finish the hole without further embarrassment so he could somehow salvage a miracle on 18. He stepped up to his ball, sitting in the rough behind the green, barely glanced at the line, and hit a casual, almost indifferent chip shot with seemingly no expectation of a positive result. The ball rolled smoothly across the fringe, tracked perfectly toward the cup, and dropped into the hole for an improbable par. Peter Allis, calling the moment for the BBC, perfectly captured the significance. That last deadly miracle of Trevino's has broken Jacklin. I'm sure we will never see another Open like this. Jacklin, suddenly confronted with this reality-altering development, proceeded to 3-putt the 17th green for bogey when par had seemed seemed automatic moments before. Then he bogeyed 18 as well. Trevino parred the final hole to win the championship by a single stroke. Beyond the immediate result, the chip destroyed something fundamental in Jacklin's competitive psychology. He later admitted that the psychological blow was something he never fully recovered from, that it marked the beginning of his decline as a legitimate major championship contender. For Jacklin, the lesson was devastating. You can do everything right, make all the correct decisions, execute your game plan perfectly, and still lose because your opponent makes a miracle shot. It shattered his belief in control. That single moment haunted Jacklin for the rest of his career. It made Trevino seem almost supernatural. Number 2 is Raymond Floyd, an established star and future Hall of Famer who learned about Lee Trevino's unique brand of terror the hard way in a private money match that became legendary. This happened in the early 1960s, before Trevino had gained his tour card, when he was still an unknown hustler. A wealthy cotton producer named Martin Letnich arranged a 54-hole money match at Horizon Hills Country Club in El Paso, backing Trevino heavily against Floyd. Floyd pulled up to the club in his gleaming white Cadillac, full of confidence. When he walked into the clubhouse, he was greeted by Trevino, who wasn't introduced as his opponent, but was working his regular job as a bag boy and locker room attendant. Trevino cleaned Floyd's golf shoes with careful attention, treating him with exaggerated deference. He carried Floyd's heavy tour bag to the first tee, playing the role of humble servant perfectly. This wasn't accidental. This was the first calculated stage of a psychological hustle Trevino had perfected. When Floyd finally asked, "Who exactly am I playing against today?" and Trevino responded with perfect timing, "Well, that would be me, sir," Floyd was visibly dismissive. How could anyone bet on a bag boy? That dismissal was exactly what Trevino wanted. By dramatically lowering Floyd's guard, Trevino created a massive psychological advantage. Then the match started, and Floyd discovered the horrible truth. Day 1, Floyd shot an excellent 66, the kind of round that wins regular tour events. Trevino shot 65, one better. Day 2, Floyd matched his opening 66. Trevino responded with a stunning 64, pulling further ahead. Day 3, Floyd finally managed to win a day with 67 to Trevino's 68, but the match was already over. Trevino had won overall. Floyd's cumulative total of 199 over 54 holes was genuinely staggering golf. Yet he barely escaped with a one-stroke victory on the final day, and even that only happened because Floyd made a clutch eagle on the 54th hole. Without that eagle, Floyd loses outright. The experience left Floyd shaken. He returned to the PGA Tour and immediately began warning his colleagues. There's a little Mexican kid in El Paso. When he comes out to the tour, everyone is going to have to make room for him. This match established the Trevino blueprint. Use an unassuming exterior and constant chatter to mask precision that is, for all practical purposes, unbeatable. Trevino later said, "I loved it when a guy backed me. That's when I was dangerous because it wasn't my money. So I had no pressure and I could just play." That fearlessness made him immune to pressure that crushed his tour rivals. Before Trevino ever set foot on the PGA Tour as a professional competitor, he spent 4 transformative years serving in the United States Marine Corps from 1956 to 1960. The Marines gave Trevino something his hustler instincts lacked: structure, discipline, systematic preparation. He represented the Corps with pride in overseas golf competitions. The Marine environment reinforced his already formidable work ethic. He became known for hitting practice balls for hours without break, until his hands literally bled. But more importantly, the Marines gave Trevino a battlefield perspective on competitive golf. To Trevino, a golf course was terrain to be conquered. An opponent was a target to be neutralized. When Trevino finally got his tour card, he brought a complete framework his rivals couldn't match. He combined the street-smart cunning of a Texas hustler with the systematic discipline of a Marine. His rivals saw golf as a gentleman's game. Trevino saw it as war. That fundamental difference gave him an enormous advantage. Number 1 on the countdown, Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear, the king of professional golf, a man whose mental toughness was considered his greatest weapon. Nicklaus had faced every conceivable challenge the game could offer and defeated nearly everyone. But Trevino was something entirely different. Nicklaus later acknowledged that while he could control himself completely, he could never control his great rivals. He couldn't control Arnold Palmer, couldn't control Gary Player, couldn't control Tom Watson, and he definitely couldn't control Lee Trevino. Nicklaus singled out Trevino as his most uniquely dangerous opponent, the player who always seemed to be there when a major championship was on the line. The statistics tell a brutal story. Nicklaus finished second to Trevino in 4 major championships, more runner-up finishes to a single rival than to any other player who challenged him. 4 times Nicklaus brought his absolute best, and it wasn't enough. The 1971 U.S. Open at Merion was the defining confrontation. After 72 holes, they were tied, forcing an 18-hole playoff. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Nicklaus was fighting to reclaim his position. Trevino was fighting to prove his 1968 win hadn't been a fluke. On the first tee of the playoff, Trevino pulled a 3-foot-long rubber snake from his golf bag and tossed it casually toward Nicklaus. Popular lore describes this as a simple prank, but the tactical value ran much deeper. Trevino was a master of vibrational control. He understood that Nicklaus thrived in solemn, reverent environments where his superior focus could suffocate opponents. By pulling out a ridiculous toy snake and making the gallery erupt in laughter, by getting even Nicklaus himself to crack a smile, Trevino effectively popped the bubble of championship gravity that Nicklaus preferred. He shifted the emotional energy toward his preferred tempo. Nicklaus, ever the perfect sportsman, asked to examine the snake up close, and he chuckled genuinely. But that chuckle signaled a critical shift. Nicklaus, now operating in a loosened-up environment that favored Trevino's approach, birdied the opening hole a strong start. But then he faltered badly. On the second hole, Nicklaus bunkered his approach and made bogey. On the third hole, he bunkered again, leading to double bogey. That bogey-double bogey sequence broke whatever remained of Nicklaus's momentum. Trevino settled comfortably into his own tempo and never looked back, cruising to victory. Later, Nicklaus spoke about Trevino with unmistakable respect. He is a good player and a very tough competitor. I really enjoyed playing against Lee. I loved him as a competitor because he knew that he was not going to beat himself when he got himself in contention and was playing well. That respect was earned through repeated defeats in the moments that defined careers. For Jack Nicklaus, the most successful major champion in history, Lee Trevino remained the one shadow he could never quite escape. So what made Lee Trevino so uniquely, devastatingly terrifying to face when a championship was on the line? The answer isn't any single factor or isolated skill. It was the synergistic combination of three distinct pillars that worked together in perfect harmony to systematically dismantle even the greatest players in golf history. First, the hustler's mindset forged in absolute poverty and real-world survival pressure. Trevino played for his literal next meal on underground gambling circuits, where losing meant genuine hardship, not just disappointment, but actual hunger. That brutal environment forged a pressure-proof mentality his country club-raised rivals couldn't replicate, no matter how hard they tried. When tournament stakes were at their highest, when millions watched and legacies hung in the balance, Trevino got calmer and more focused, not more nervous. While others tightened up under the crushing weight of expectation, Trevino loosened up, freed by the knowledge that he'd already survived worse. He'd already played golf when it truly mattered for survival. Professional tournaments, even majors, were just golf after that. Second, rhythmic chaos that disrupted opponents' carefully constructed mental frameworks. Trevino never let a competitive round breathe or settle into the quiet, meditative rhythm most champions desperately needed to access their best golf. His constant talking, endless joking, relentless energy disrupted players like Gary Player, who needed absolute silence to function at their peak. Tom Watson couldn't find his controlled framework when paired with Trevino's non-stop commentary. Even Jack Nicklaus, after the rubber snake incident shattered his solemn championship focus, lost his systematic rhythm and couldn't recover it. Trevino didn't just play golf and try to post the lowest score, he controlled the entire vibe and emotional atmosphere of the round itself, forcing opponents to either play at his frenetic tempo, or Johnny Miller called his ball striking almost inhuman in its consistency. Tom Weiskopf couldn't intellectually reconcile how something so technically ugly could produce such reliably elite results, tournament after tournament. When you combine these three powerful elements, when you synthesize them into a single complete competitor, you create someone who is very nearly impossible to beat when playing well. Someone who doesn't crack psychologically under pressure because he's already survived genuine survival pressure that made golf look trivial. Someone who disrupts your mental focus and rhythm just by being his authentic self without even trying. Someone who hits shots that shouldn't be repeatable with a swing that shouldn't work according to textbooks but somehow does, perfectly, again and again and again. That combination of mental immunity, tactical disruption, and mechanical mystery is absolutely terrifying to face across 72 holes when a major championship is at stake. But here's the most important truth about Lee Trevino's terrifying reputation. The fear his legendary rivals felt wasn't really about intimidation. It was actually respect, the deepest form of competitive respect possible. They didn't fear Trevino because he was cruel or unfair. They feared him because he systematically exposed their carefully hidden weaknesses. He showed Jack Nicklaus that even the strongest mental toughness has exploitable limits. He showed Gary Player that perfect discipline can be disrupted. He showed Tony Jacklin that sometimes your opponent just makes a miracle. He showed Tom Weiskopf that beautiful swings don't guarantee success. He showed Arnold Palmer that charisma can be outflanked. Trevino was terrifying because he fundamentally refused to play by the established rules that governed championship golf. He brought the raw hustle of Texas gambling circuits to the hallowed grounds of Marion, Muirfield, and Royal Birkdale. He proved that the most effective way to win is to make your opponent feel like they're playing a different game, one they no longer fully understand. And remarkably, he did all of this while cracking jokes and making galleries laugh. The legends feared him because when Lee Trevino was on his game, he didn't just beat you, he made you fundamentally doubt everything you thought you knew about golf. Lee Trevino's lasting legacy, it is a powerful reminder that greatness doesn't always look the way traditional expectations suggest. He didn't have the perfect swing, he didn't have the country club pedigree, he didn't play with stoic silence, but he had something his rivals didn't possess: the ability to make genuinely impossible swings look routine, the mental toughness to thrive under pressure that would crush ordinary players, and the authentic confidence to be unapologetically himself in a sport that demanded conformity. That's exactly why golf legends still struggle to find adequate words explaining how terrifying Lee Trevino truly was in his prime. Because he wasn't just another great player, he was a genuine force of nature who fundamentally changed professional golf by absolutely refusing to change himself to fit expectations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychological warfare and pure brilliance of Lee Trevino, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from golf history that reveal the mental battles happening between the shots. Drop a comment below telling us which legend's struggle with Trevino surprised you most. And don't forget to hit that hype button one more time to show this video some love. Lee Trevino proved conclusively that the most dangerous opponent is the one who absolutely refuses to beat himself. And in the end, that unshakable mental toughness combined with impossible swings is exactly what made Lee Trevino golf's most terrifying competitor.